Robert, we will later go ahead and edit out parts and ask you for your permission to post it, etc. But usually we don't edit out much except for the beginning and end. But if we don't start recording right away, we tend to get into these good conversations that are like,
Right.
who are you? What are you interested in? And then we don't record it and then we're sad.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Who are you? What are you interested in?
exactly.
Good question. Do you want me to answer that now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Why not?
Okay.
We're very casual, so it's already started.
Right, fair enough.
Welcome to Pandas playing cello.
Thank you.
We're the pandas
Good
and
to be
this is
here.
the cello.
Okay. The cello is the orchestration.
The cello is the conversation.
Okay. Makes sense. I don't know how to answer the question of who I am. That could get into like esoteric subjects that maybe we won't start there. But
Let's start there.
So, well, in terms of what I suspect you were asking is maybe more the kinds of things that I've done in my life and what I'm interested in, what I'm working on now. So,
Sure, but we should definitely put a pin in that esoteric idea.
okay. Yeah, so I basically spent a large part of my life pursuing a very large scale multidisciplinary project in academia. And that's why I went to grad school, was to sort of pursue these ideas that I had, kind of like ways of integrating knowledge in general. And sort of noticing kind of analogies between conceptual systems across very different sort of regions of reality or something like that. And I wanted to take these initially kind of vague and nebulous ideas and provide a rigorous foundation for them. So I ended up after doing a bunch of things in undergrad, including like math and physics and philosophy and chemistry, I did a graduate work in philosophy, and that sort of evolved in a number of different directions. And what ended up being my project started more with a historical focus, looking at how theories are developed in science, particular like electromagnetic theory and theories of the luminiferous ether and all that interesting stuff. And then evolved more to how we apply contemporary theories, like how do we take a mathematical theory of some aspect of the natural world and actually apply that to gain understanding or insight into phenomena that we don't currently understand, or make predictions or that kind of thing. So in general, there's a complex cycle with all of these, because there's theory creation and theory application are entangled processes, and this very complex dynamic historically and as this sort of goes forward. And it was way beyond the sort of interest or sort of capabilities of one person to really develop all that out. So I was trying to pare it down to something that I could focus on and sort of build into a research program. Because basically every paper I would write about it ended up being a whole research program. And so and then having multiple of those. So eventually I sort of, found better and better ways of articulating what I was trying to say, and it was getting interesting. The PhD in philosophy that I did was the sort of first crystallization of that. And then I ended up wanting to pursue this and not sure how to do it exactly. I ended up doing a second PhD in applied math, and I kind of carried forward my philosophical epistemological interests into scientific work in applied math, in particular looking at how making inference efficient and reliable, which is kind of what science is concerned with in a very general way, to how to apply those ideas in computation, in particular the sort of area of computation I was working, computational science. focused on computer algebra, like symbolic computing, and a little bit of combining numerics in with that as well. Anyway, so there was that epistemological focus to my work in applied math, and I ended up doing a postdoc in computer science with one of my supervisors working in high performance computer algebra. But I was at the same time trying to figure out how to carry forward my epistemological ideas, because that's really what I wanted to do. So in trying to figure out how you get something like this funded, it's very broad, very general. And, you know, I was looking at patterns across physics, applied mathematics, computation, pure mathematics, other areas of science. Very general patterns I was finding, which were very interesting. But to get it funded, it needs to be really in one discipline, so that, you know, person who's seeing this is properly equipped to evaluate whether this should be funded. So I was figuring out how to do that in computer science, which makes sense because computation is kind of everywhere and it's fundamental to all kinds of inference, at least rational inference. The intuitive side, that's less.
We talk
clear.
a lot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But from an academic scientific point of view, that's, you know, what I was talking about. But yeah, so I reached a point where just the effort of trying to get this thing going for such a long time I just reached a point where I didn't have the energy to do it anymore. So I needed to really leave and do something else. Plus, it was such a scientifically interesting, but so rarefied compared to, well, not rarefied, I guess it's kind of
Esoteric?
too specific.
Arcane.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
too narrow in focus, I think is what I mean.
It's interesting because it's very general, but it's narrow in focus. Yeah.
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 But I was interested in these general patterns and wanted to really explore across fields in a more flexible way. But doing that is very hard from a funding perspective, because, you know, it's like interdisciplinary work gets a lot of it gets talked up a lot, but it's very hard to do. And it usually works best when the fields are very closely related, or the phenomenon that they're examining is really the same phenomenon, but approached in different ways, as opposed to what I was trying to do is look at patterns across many different disciplines. It's a very different kind of idea of what multidisciplinary work means.
Well, also the subject is science itself, like you're studying science itself. And so
Exactly.
that's very different from most scientific studies, which are not about science.
Yes.
You're reminding me, last night I watched Infinite Potential.
David
Right.
Bohm.
Just the documentary about the life of the physicist David Bohm. I don't know how it's Bohm.
Yeah, Bohm.
And I just, you know, about once every 3 months, some idea crumb. I notice some idea crumb and I go, oh, what's that? And then I start following, and I disappeared down that path for a while. And
Cool.
I got to Bohm via Martin Buber. And but anyway, lest I digress, what you're talking about, what your pursuits are, seem similar to me to what David Bohm's interests were, which was to kind of identify, as I understand it, identify some common unifying patterns across many disciplines.
Like, what are the hidden variables that are guiding discovery?
Right, you know, physics, philosophy, so forth and so on.
Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't thought about. I mean, I appreciate that comparison. I mean, but yeah, I guess what's coming up to mind with that is the conversations he had with Krishnamurti, where all of that.
Exactly. Once I discovered that in the documentary, I was scurrying down that path, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah. And I think they were quite fond of each other, and they had such fascinating conversations. that element comes out, I think, in those conversations, like, which is a broader scope still, which gets more into, I guess, the who am I question at the beginning of this.
Yeah, how would
Uh,
you answer the who am I from an esoteric? Actually, before you do that, what if you were talking with someone who wasn't a sort of a professional thinker? Carmen and I are sort of professional thinkers, right? But what if you were talking to someone who wasn't a professional thinker, but you wanted to explain to them
Someone you
and
met at a bar, someone you've just met at
right.
a bar.
yeah, someone you just met at a bar, right? How would you explain to them, like in a
Seems like a friendly
sentence?
person, you
Yeah,
know.
Right.
like what you just said to us in that rather complicated, verified way.
So I guess the way I originally described this project, and you can imagine how this was received by the graduate department that I entered into, was that I wanted to work on a theory of everything, like how to logically ground a theory of everything in the sense, like not in the physics sense of theory of everything, but in the sense of really like integrating knowledge systems across all of different areas of human thought.
So you want to make a world map of knowledge.
Yeah, but at that time I was trying to make it very specific by focusing on science.
Yeah.
It's like scientific,
Really just taking off the science
yeah,
piece of
just
this.
that,
Look
that
how
little piece.
constrained you're
Yeah,
being.
exactly. So um, that's what I was sort of had in mind to do, and was making it obviously radically more specific than that. I was going to focus on, I don't know, like quantum field theory or something like that, or maybe a few different theories in physics, because I wrote this undergrad paper. I don't know what I would think of it now if I went back and read it, but looking at different places in physics where infinity, the concept of infinity pops up, and trying to find, just from a naive perspective, like what maybe holds those together, like from a point of view of limitations of theoretical systems and how infinity is related to the ways in which they're limited. So
I'm
like,
going to ask you a completely crazy question. It just popped in my mind, but in your study, are there different cultures on this planet that are more receptive to what you're describing, or already have a tendency to think more along these lines than other cultures?
I mean, I definitely find far more parallels to the kind of view of the world and way of approaching it, like even from a sort of almost logical point of view in Eastern systems of thought than in Western ones. In
So
particular,
where do you put Jewish in that continuum?
I would, so I
Or
don't,
like even
so
Jewish
I guess,
esoteric, like Kabbalistic.
well, I was just going to say, like, it would relate more if I'm not making an East-West comparison. So what I was going to say was like more like Buddhism and Taoism. Like there's a lot of sympathies to those systems of thought with the kind of perspective that comes out of what I've been trying to do. Another way of cutting it would be, yeah, more mystical traditions, definitely. So then that cuts across all religions, because all religions have a form of mysticism. So yeah, Kabbalah and Judaism, there's Christian mystics, Sufis. So all the Abrahamic religions have their version of that, and I think there's a kind of flexibility in the understanding of the world, and it's more about experience and cultivating states of consciousness, and having experiences that like navigating realms of consciousness essentially, and the conceptual frameworks provide a kind of a guide, could help to sort of along that path to make sense of certain experiences. And I think there's a reason why there's a lot of sympathy. Shinzen Young was the first person I heard talk about this.
And who was he?
Sympathy.
Can you say who he was?
Yeah, not
Oh,
familiar.
he trained as a very experienced meditator. He trained in the Zen Buddhist tradition, I believe. But he also learned a lot of science, but he learned the science, I think, after he reached these higher states of consciousness, and it sort of opened him up his mind to, he lost the fear of mathematics and physics. And so he has really interesting things to say about the relationship between science and consciousness and spirituality.
It reminds
And
me so much, losing the fear, your comment about that. I know we're going down, this is part of the playing cello, is we go down a road, and we may
sure,
never
sure,
go back to these other roads, but but that's the fun of it. It's like a fugue. But this reminds me of the Ramachandran, the mathematician. Is that the name of the
well,
math Ramanujan? Right.
yeah,
Or Ramanujan, depending on how you actually
that's
pronounce
how
it.
I'm remembering it. But yeah.
Yeah, who actually said, yeah, all of these equations were written with blood on the tongue of the goddess or something like this.
Mhm.
And Wright worked with W.H. Hardy, I believe.
Is he
Yes.
the one that comes to England
Yeah, exactly.
and,
Yes.
and
And
Went
then
they're
to
like,
school.
he's
dies
not even,
sort of young?
yeah, he's young,
Yeah.
he's not
Yeah,
trained
he's not
formally,
trained,
but
but
he
he's
has
like,
this interesting math, and
yeah,
it's like a diamond in the
exactly.
rough. But really what they're
Right,
saying
yeah.
is we're taking this Eastern person and putting him into the Western world and making him better. But in fact, he was like already super insightful. But that reminds me a little of that, is that losing the fear of the reality of you're not in control of your insight.
Mm.
So there's this fear, that the fear of discovery, because if you ride the train of discovery, you discover that it's not you who's the engineer. Does that, am I picking up on that in you, or am I saying that myself? Are you saying that, or am I saying something else?
Well, let me tie it back in with what I was saying, and then we'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say, what Shinzen Young, I learned from him, because part of what he did, he had access to one of his mentors' libraries, and he just started reading all the books in that library, and and there was a lot of books about different mystical traditions. This is the story as I remember it, and he was surprised to see how they were really just, from his perspective, describing the same thing, using different language from different perspectives. And this gets to where I think it relates to what you were saying, is what's happening with mystical experience, in my view, and I think what he is saying is, you really are navigating a territory that's there. And it's only navigable by actually having experiences of cultivating altered states of consciousness, primarily through meditation and other techniques. Like Sufis have the
dance.
the dervishes, right? And so because it's a territory, there's a kind of objectivity to it, even though it's subjectively navigated. So it's this weird interplay, sort of cross-cutting of these notions.
Yeah.
And there's something like that, I think, with in a different way with Ramanujan or Ramanujan, in that his experience of it, he was communicating with some kind of goddess or spirit that was revealing these mathematical insights to him. So he was able to have certain kinds of conscious experience that enabled him to work with technical ideas that wasn't rational, like not fully rational in this sort of calculating sense. But there was something objective that he was connecting with, even though it's accessible in subjective experience in that way, and that he had access to, but others around him didn't.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's
that,
yeah.
sorry, that theme is, I think, pretty common among great thinkers, whether they were philosophers or spiritual thinkers or scientists or political philosophers. They often say, I can't tell you exactly where my idea came from, but one day it appeared in my head.
Yes.
Or they will say, I could almost hear someone telling me this idea, like from some other place, and they were telling me the idea. And that, in your theory of everything, I mean, I've read countless stories like that, where the great thinker says, I just don't really know where that idea came from. It seemed to come from outside me. That's
Or the
pretty much the
musician,
summary.
or the musician, or the creative
Yeah.
artist,
Yeah,
or
or the
something.
musician,
Yeah.
or the
Mozart.
it's definitely
Mozart.
true of uh now I'm stumbling trying to think exactly what is the difference between music and philosophy. Why do we think
Right,
they're
if you
different?
receive it in the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is if we're gonna argue that philosophy is only when you're using sort of your rational capacities to link up ideas in some kind of linear order, then philosophy becomes very stupid. Right? Philosophy becomes sort of like a chess game, and you could show where all the moves come from. But the best philosophy is this kind of, that's like music, right? The best philosophy is like, I don't know where that came from, but that just is beautiful and fits with, this is an insight from inside, right? Insight that fits in with the story and gives me a feeling of understanding. I don't think that can come from a chess game.
Well, to me, it's there's a sort of dialectical element to that. You need both.
Yeah.
Like I would say, well, from my experience in Western academic philosophy, there's far too much of an emphasis. I mean, and it's I say limiting bias maybe of a lot of academia in general towards predictable, provable outcomes, and the sort of connections to economics are kind of obvious as to why it's driven in that way, but also a closeness to really exploration, true creativity, and like openness to anything. And that's kind of why I went into philosophy, because I viewed it as that kind of a discipline. But
Sorry.
but the academic discipline, well, I mean, as maybe I would say it, not I viewed it as that, but in the sense of the options, it's the most like that I could think to choose.
That
So
makes sense.
yeah. But especially analytic philosophy, which is the tradition I was sort of trained in, is very logical, very much. It's not about creating ideas. It's taking something someone has proposed and sort of basically
Destroying it.
finding all of the flaws with it.
Yes.
So you can't do this, you can't do that. This maybe, but blah blah blah, and so trying to pare it down to the most clear, the most certain, perspective out of something. But if it's all that, it ends up just devolving into a chess game, because then it's like, okay, I'm going to find my part of sort of perspective in this philosophical debate that I know I can sit and defend, and I can build a career on that and publish papers, and I will just make a game of that my whole career. And so I make a nice life for myself, and I'm happy, and that's so. But what is that contributing to society and culture? I don't know, right?
Right.
So the real engine of philosophy to me is a back and forth between these two things, because you need creativity to have anything new, and an openness. You need to be able to step out of that critical state of mind, like to bracket that out in sort of phenomenological terms, and really have that clear, open mind to possibility and explore that possibility, examine the space and try to find the shape of it. And then once you have a way of clearly articulating that, then you switch over to the logical, critical frame of mind, and how do I organize that, get rid of all the stuff that doesn't make sense, and then you bring that back to the phenomena again, and you deepen the insight, but again, be open, and you know what I mean? So it has to go back and forth between these modes to really generate something of great value that extends beyond the experience itself.
Amen.
So I'm just going to ask you just a super practical question. So you got your PhD, you did postdoctoral work on computer science. Did I hear that right?
Yep.
And so did you end up with a career in academia, or?
No. So that was the thing. Like, so all of my pursuit of this, a large part of it for a long time was not my main thing, because my supervisors were trying to get me to do something different. But my drive for why I was there kept sort of pushing me back towards something that looked like what I was originally trying to do. So it was a long time, like in grad school, doing research of various kinds, trying to build this out. And eventually, I started to get some interest in what I was doing. There was a sort of community of philosophers in the sort of subfield of philosophy of science called philosophy of applied mathematics, which is what I was kind of focusing into. And they could see the value in what I was doing, and you know, it was great to have support of a community of academics that was for doing something a little bit different, but still made sense within the context of that literature, et cetera. So it was building in, you know, a direction of something, but it's also, I don't know, it was just a complicated story, but I ended up where I was and really came to the conclusion that I needed to do something different, which is, you know, what takes me out of academia and into what I'm doing now. So
Are we
Which
allowed to,
is?
yeah, what are you doing now? And also, are we allowed to back up to that complicated story and outline it a little bit? Because I certainly have a similar story, as you know, about leaving academia, or sort of putting one foot in academia and putting the rest of large amount of my body and elsewhere. So I'm very curious about that, but I don't know if you want to talk about it. And what are you doing now?
okay, well, we'll start with what I'm doing now, I guess. So about 2.5 years ago, I was doing a cybersecurity training program at the Fields Institute in Toronto, doing it remotely. And it was designed to the main company that I'm working for now found me on LinkedIn and had great conversations. And then I ended up joining one of his projects, and then rolling into the sort of the main one, which is called Hypercycle. And basically, Hypercycle is taking an advanced technology for building distributed systems for digital assets that have the security and efficiency requirements to really, essentially, like, if you imagine if we were to rebuild the internet in a way that allows exchange of value as efficiently as it allows exchange of information, it's the fundamental technology to make that sort of thing possible.
So you
So
can
that,
autonomously exchange. So I'm going to say this in other words and see if it's true. This is how I know Robert is through Hypercycle. So so that that autonomously value could be exchanged.
sure, yeah,
Right.
machine to machine transactions, yeah.
Right. Whereas
Yeah.
right now we think we can exchange value between people, but it's a machine saying, like, I'm going to pay for your electricity so you could do this computation.
Sorry, I missed I think that was a question or a statement. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
no, it's a question. Is it like a machine saying to another machine, I'll pay for your electricity if you do this computation?
I see. Well, I mean, it's paying for some exchange of value. I mean, it could be applied to electricity costs, or it could be something else.
I see.
But
So that was just an example. But
yeah, sure,
yeah,
sure, sure.
the general case is
So
any value.
I'm trying to center on this concept of value. So, you know, I can spend time with another person because I value how I feel when I'm with them for an hour. It's uplifting. I leave in a good mood, and that's very valuable to me. So I'm even motivated to buy their dinner
Mm.
because maybe they can't afford it, but I, you know, the trade in my mind is fair. I get an hour of this brilliant company, and hopefully they think it's fair that they get a nice meal.
Maybe
Mhm.
they
Is
also
that
like
what?
talking to you, Carmen.
And they do, you know, it's possible. But is that what you mean by value, or am I just
Uh,
totally missing
kind
the
of.
boat?
No, I mean, uh, value is one of these difficult concepts. It's like, I mean, people often distinguish between price and value. Like, price is this sort of very well-determined kind of thing, and the price is, you know, whatever people will pay for it, kind of thing. Whereas value is can be like that. Like, there are forms of it that behave more that way, but it's also this vastly more general notion that has an element of subjectivity in it, because different people will find different things valuable. And so some people will pay some amount of currency, which is a representation of a certain kind of value, in order to have experiences that are providing value in some other way. So there is an exchange of value happening, and that involves both. But I think, at least with respect to the machine kinds of things, it's probably more on the, like, less of the experiential value and more of the, just raw economic value in some sense.
But this
But
is,
but as you get into economies of tokens, where the token is something that is, designed into a system in order to represent some other kind of value, and you can have exchange of that, then you have ways of tokenized representations of these kinds of things. But it's really experimental, I think, at this point, how that will actually, reflect in a functional way the kind of thing that you're describing. Anyway, that's my rough sense.
okay, question. I am questioning this idea that you can exchange value. Okay, because in Carmen's example, which I think is really interesting, that value is a human experience. It's a subjective experience, right? The value didn't get exchanged. The value arose in her. It arises internally. It stays internal. She experiences it. It never gets exchanged. So is the idea of exchange of value one that's real? You're not exchanging an internal subjective experience. You're exchanging at the I think in the world of capitalist systems, we're used to this idea that exchanging money makes value arise in us, the feeling that there's a value has arisen in us. But is that because we are actually into the relationship? Like that money creates a relationship, and we're actually experiencing like a dopamine surge because, and maybe a serotonin surge, like maybe it's really validating to just say, yeah, I'm in relationship with the outside world. In other words, I wonder about this idea of exchanging value, or if you just exchange anything, the exchange of anything can or cannot, depending on the person's psychology, lead to a feeling of value. And then how does that relate to, for instance, machine consciousness? So if machines begin, as AIs begin to potentially have more self-awareness or have more subjective experience, are they starting to feel valued when they're being asked to do tasks or getting money to pass along to the person who built them or whatever? Can value arise in them? So again, not exchanged, but just arise.
No, I don't know the answer to that question.
I
But
know, me neither.
it
What do you
it brings
think?
up it brings up so two things, I think, here. One is, I suspect there are a number of different senses of value that are being are flowing into each other.
Yeah.
And the sort of, in the sense, what I'm talking about, exchange of value, is where you have things that behave more like currency or economic tokens or something like that, where there is a literal exchange of one thing for another, things that are regarded as valuable because they can do something with them. So either it's information, I can do something with that information, or it's money and I can, pay someone to do something, or I can pay for my electricity. Whereas the subjective experience of value is something different. And so it's not obvious how you tokenize that. And it, as you point out, it behaves in a different way. It's something that arises out of an interaction, as opposed to something that I already possess that I can give to somebody else. That's one element of it. And the other, I think, is the other way people often talk about this is exchange of energy of some kind. And you could think of, to me, that there ought to be a way, like if there's a physics of economics, it will be based in thermodynamics. And so there'll be an energetics of it in a literal sense. And I know that systems like that exist. People have mapped them out, but I think it's very hard to have a sort of direct correspondence between energy and money. But supposing there's something like that, there's, in any kind of interaction, there's energy expenditure, and for it to feel like a fair exchange, there needs to be some equal contribution on either side. And people talk in those terms about fair exchange of energy in, spiritual circles, but I think otherwise as well. But given this idea that there's, money you could think of as a form of potential energy, because it carries a capacity to do work. Like you give this to somebody and it will make things happen. So whether that's work literally or by analogy in the same sense as work in physics, I don't know. But there ought to be a way of thinking of things in these terms, and that does capture more aspects of what's going on in the broader sense of creation of value out of interaction and the exchange that's happening to make that happen.
Well, and it
There's a lot-
also leads in, like, if there were a physics of the economy kind of idea, which is a cool idea to me, it also leads into, back to David Bohm, understanding the relationship between the objective and the subjective. So, like, are there particular equations that describe the physics of the economy such that it's more likely to lead to an internal experience of value? Right? Maybe there are certain kinds of exchanges that you could quantify that produce this an actual feeling of value arising, are more likely to produce that. And so that could actually bring the subjective and the objective together if you consider both of those. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, totally.
All right. PhD number 3, Robert.
So that's somebody else's job. I think it's not
Oh, thank God.
not me. But
That's really
a lovely idea, and I would love to. I mean, it reminds me of an earlier conversation we were having about game theory, and not that I'm an expert in game theory, not by any stretch, but now I'm losing the idea. The idea is floating away. So
Oh, okay. It'll come back if it's to be shown.
yeah.
So
Well-
sorry.
No, I was just going to say a couple of random things that popped into my head listening to this. So I have never been able to understand math, or that's not quite right. Well, I mean, that is actually the result of whatever the dynamic is in my head. The result is that literally I can't wrap my head around mathematical concepts. And you could say maybe I just had bad experiences early on, I had the wrong math teachers or whatever, but who knows? So I was fascinated with your story about I think the Buddhist who first went through a lot of meditation and then ended up exploring these high level mathematical concepts, because I don't think that happens in that direction that often. I think the other direction, like the David Bohm experience, is more common, where someone becomes a physicist or whatever, and then all of a sudden jumps into this other dimension. So these are not connected thoughts, these are just random things. So that's number one that I wanted to say. Number two, when you were talking about how the Eastern perspective of the world or of existence is, more related to what your intellectual pursuits have been than the Western, it made me think about the accident of there being these incredibly compelling philosophers in Scotland.
Yes.
In the 17th and 18th century. So Adam Smith, David Hume, I think John Locke, but I'm not positive, but I know for sure Hume and Adam Smith were Scots.
Yeah.
And how they arose in an environment where mercantilism was and capitalism were just beginning. And they gave us these very clear, functional ways of thinking about these issues that were and are useful, but are incomplete. But it's taken people a long time, and not everyone's, most people maybe still don't believe they're incomplete. They're like, Adam Smith, if you just understand Adam Smith, that's it. You got it, right? That's the second one. And then the third one is not really intended to be frivolous, but whenever I'm in a conversation like this, which I enjoy very much, and which these are conversations that I have with myself, internal conversations all the time. Maybe not quite this intellectually grand or whatever, but I still have these conversations with myself. I'll look at someone that I see in a Walmart, and for some reason, this person grabs my attention, and I ask myself, I wonder what their inner life is like. So, how many people do you think are like that? Pick your society in America. Is it 1 out of 100? Is it 1 out of 10? Is it 3, 4, or 5 out of 10? I don't know. We never know what other person's inner thinking life is like. So you don't have to react to any of them, but if any of them are interesting to you, please do react.
Well, and before you do,
And I think he froze. Sadly.
oh, he's thinking.
He's thinking a lot.
Well,
Oh, there, are
before
you back? Did you hear?
think
Did
I'm
you
back.
hear my 3 points?
I heard 2.5, like you were getting into the latter part of.
I was just wondering.
Well, you were asking how many
How
people.
many people do you
Yeah.
think around us have that kind of inner life? Because I'll admit that I'm kind of elitist, and I don't know, I'm assuming, perhaps incorrectly, that most people that I run across, even my friends, don't think about this very often. So a word that some of my friends use, which I think kind of approaches this, is when they use the word grace. So I have very Catholic friends, and we sometimes, they'll mention grace, I'll talk about grace, and it's almost, I mean, they're using it in a way of God's grace, but I'm probably using it more of in this, the grace of the universe, or the grace of existence. And I don't even know what I mean by grace exactly, other than this vague feeling that things turn to the good, that there is it's not nihilism, that there's
Mhm.
Carmen,
a point. There's a point.
today you texted me and said, I love how the universe padiddles.
Yes, I did. Actually,
Yes.
it's pedaddles.
Oh, I'm
Sorry,
really
but
sorry.
yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the way that the thing that you brought this, I'm sorry, Robert, I just have to spring in here.
Yeah.
The thing that you brought up was, observing other people and not wondering about their inner
Yeah.
life. But
Yes.
then you turn to this sort of experience of like, there's some kind of a plan, even though it's not a logical plan. There's some kind of landscape, even though it's not a logical.
That's
And
what grace is. Grace, when religious people use that word grace, it implies and contains all those meanings.
but you combined this idea of wondering about the internal life with this grace idea,
Yeah.
which is a Jungian notion that I was just sending you that email
Oh,
about.
I haven't looked at that yet.
Yeah. There's the Jungian notion of the psychoid, which is the union of the physical and the mental, or the physical and the spiritual, and how central that is to mystical insight and to creativity. That is the root, that is like the seed. And anyway, so I love calling it grace. And I just wanted to say that.
Okay. Yeah.
So maybe I can talk about some of the things that came up from what you're both just discussing. The word gentle orchestration came up to mind when you were describing what grace means in that sense, and like the universe is like there's a compassion to how this orchestration happens, and a kindness that's inherent to how it happens. That's like the graceful sort of aspect of nature reflected in this way. That's one thing that came up. I'll see if I can remember what the other things were.
Those particularly unhelpful Scottish
Oh,
philosophers.
right.
That
Uh,
accident of history.
Well,
Or was it?
I don't know. I
Did they
love.
need to emerge? Did they need to provide that at that time
Hmm.
so that we could move on to whatever the next thing was going to be?
I mean, Adam Smith's contributions, I think, were extremely important. I won't be able to bring to mind the basic insight because it's just in the wrong location in my memory right now. But if you're familiar with Yanis Varoufakis, I had a reading group with some of my friends. He's believe he's Greek economist, brilliant guy, has very, very interesting insights about economics, and he was an economics professor for a while. He wrote a book on economics that is sort of presenting the basic theory, but also then sort of criticism of that theory and trying to sort of situate like what it gets right, what it's missing. And I've only gotten partway through the book, but he talks a lot about Hume and others and the fundamental contributions that they made and how they're really important insights, but there's limitations. So anyway, I'm just rambling about that because I can't remember anything coherent
good.
about
It's
it.
all good.
The other side is David Hume. To me, David Hume is one of the best philosophers. His ideas are so clear and so kind of final in a way, like not that final in the sense that that's all there is to say on these topics, like the way that some people view Plato's ideas or Socrates, depending on where you think they came from. But in the sense that I attach it in my mind, this is going to be ramble jumble because I haven't thought about this stuff in a long time either. But like in a similar way, behaviorism in contrast to internalism or whatever, I don't know what the other
Phenomenology or subjective experience.
No, there's some other term because behaviorism I think is from
It's
psychology.
all about third person.
But it was in contrast to views of the psyche where you had access to describe internal states and that kind of thing. So
yeah.
Behaviorism is purely a sort of positivistic discipline because we all have access to the data and we know for certain. And so that's the clearest thing to base a science on. There's something analogous to that in my mind right now for some reason with Hume's ideas. So like there's a definiteness to them and a sort of uncontroversiality to them. But they have that same sort of external character that whatever's underlying the phenomena he has nothing to say about because there has no access to it, and it makes sense. And that sort of leads into Kant with phenomena and noumena, and Hume is such a major influence for Kant, right? And Kant is often considered like the best philosopher by a lot of people.
He's like a reaction to Hume.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
What woke him from his dogmatic slumber is the famous quote. But it's so there's something really important about Hume's ideas, but it's also it's like the positivistic aspect of it. And I don't know if that's the correct way to think about it. This is just, again, this is intuition speaking, not rational philosophy talk. That there's like whatever is providing. So to tie it back to the previous thought, since there's an opportunity here, whatever that gentle orchestration is, that's something that's behind all of the experiences, all the definiteness, and we can't explain it, we can't access it, except through intuitive or altered states of consciousness, that kind of thing. That's where we connect to the divine. It's where we connect to the larger reality of which this is a part. And so I think that's what's lacking in those ideas, and probably a lot of economic ideas as well, I guess, but I can't think about that right now. I'm not enough of I'm not well enough read in economics to link that in. But that's how I think, I don't know, that's what's coming up right now. And it somehow
Good.
connects to the stuff we were talking about, exchange of value, exchange of energy before. Then there was another thing I was going to bring in, if I can remember what it is. Oh yeah, it's so like the other element of, to me, what I meant by theory of everything. And it's more like I view, so it's, the picture really requires a different way of thinking about certain basic terms. And I think it's part of what makes it hard to articulate. One of those is experience. Because what I mean by experience is, in the history of philosophy, tends to be visual presentation, like it's visual experience, and very minor other, like attention to other senses. But what I mean by experience is everything that's contained in phenomenal experience, which includes, you know, all the five senses, as well as thought, as well as intuition, and anything that appears there, that's experience. And then we have ways of navigating that get expressed in language and have certain structure to them. And as we understand them, they provide a sort of map that we put on experience that makes sense of it, and that allow transformations of experience into different experiences. So every conceptual system has that function, whether it's a scientific system or a spiritual system, or you know, a way of teaching you how to do art. It's all providing that kind of transformation of experience in that general sense of experience.
Well, and that is very likely to lead to value arising.
Yeah, I mean, the default of value, I think, is still a subjective thing, because it has something to do with the content of experience for an individual.
Right,
And,
but that experience being transformed in that way.
oh,
I
sure,
think,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely, yes.
yeah.
So the piece I was wanting to bring in, I don't know why, but this came to mind, is, so experience is then a very, very broad thing, and it's presented in this sort of discrete and continuous way. So it's like, there's a continuity for us in how it's presented to us as individuals, but then we're many individuals all having our own experiences. And the only way we can sort of understand each other is where we can find some kind of symmetry. And language has that symmetry, that's the structure. And where we find sort of correlated ways, or where we believe they're correlated ways of tying things in my experience to your experience, we have a sense of exchange. There's also, like, you know, tingles that you get when you feel like you're really connecting with someone or something. So there's other things that kick in that show that there really is communication happening, and that sort of transformative element of connection and communication. But the point I'm trying to get to is kind of like, from this point of view, there's nothing special about any one conceptual system versus another. Like if it's a spiritual system, or it's a scientific system, or it's like a code of ethics, or it's like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like there's a very general pattern. They're all navigating different realms of phenomena, but it's all part of this continuous manifold of experience that's presented in this weird, continuous and discrete way.
Yeah.
So this is the perspective that's sort of underlying how I approach all of this stuff. So it dissolves a lot of boundaries, but it makes it hard to articulate sometimes. But I guess where I think maybe I'll finish with this, because where I hope this is going is, it provides a way of having as you adopt this kind of view more, you start to attach less strongly to any particular perspective of a given phenomenon, because you recognize they're really just different perspectives of the same, you know, region of experience or whatever, right? And so it's less about the very specific details or beliefs associated with that perspective, and more about what we share in that, the collective understanding that we can develop by playing with perspectives and ideas in this way. And so I hope that some of the divisions that we find that attach to particular ways of looking at things, and ways that we identify with those perspectives as individuals, and the conflict that comes from that. I feel as though this way of looking at things provides a way of sort of relaxing out of that a little bit and connecting more with presence, and which connects back, Carmen, to what you were saying. Like, I think that what holds people together in the like the similar sort of frame of mind is people who are really able to be present in their current situation and experience what's around them, as opposed to stuck in their head and looking at their phones and thinking about this and that thing. They're not really present at all. They're just stuck in ideas in their mind.
Right.
And there's lots of people who cultivate that state of awareness. And I think more and more we're coming together. So I'm excited about the possibilities of that as well.
Very cool.
I feel like you answered the who am I piece. But to give you a final sort of question, if you had to answer that in an esoteric way in one word or one sentence, who are you?
To me, I don't identify as a human. I identify more as a sort of pattern in consciousness, I guess. It's the way I've inclined to express it here. And I think it's very likely that that pattern of consciousness extends vastly beyond, the experience of Robert Hugh Caldwell Moir. So insofar as I know what I am, I know it's more I know what I'm not, that I'm not just this, human having this experience in this life. There's a much, much larger story, but I don't know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
Do you have a favorite sports team?
Sports.
Yeah, I'm asking something very concrete here.
No, it's a great question. Not a big follower of sports. I was more of a player of sports when I was young. I was really into soccer and rugby, and I enjoyed watching sort of international.
Oh, did he freeze?
He froze again. Yeah, we'll just wait a second.
Yeah. What do you think it's going to be? International mud wrestling?
No, maybe international rugby.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, so
international what?
you enjoyed watching?
Oh, hockey. I was about to start talking.
Oh, hockey.
For a little while, but I was too involved in the outcome and not enough the process.
Oh.
So when the Maple Leafs got kicked out of the playoffs, I got very disappointed. And that happened a couple of years in succession, and then I just gave up. So I wasn't invested enough in the culture. And
what do you read or watch or do? I don't know what to describe that, but to relax your mind, maybe, or just an enjoyable way to pass time.
I think one of the things that comes to mind with first, I don't do enough, I think, activities of that kind, and I'm trying to find ways of connecting with that more. That's a whole other story. But one of the things I really enjoy a lot is going on walks with my wife, and we both really value connection to nature, like in an experiential sense. And we're both blessed to live in area of Vancouver. We have sort of very close access to forest and mountains and ocean water, and beautiful parks. And so, yeah, we go walking together almost every day. And I think that's sort of one of the most important parts of our day. And then longer walks on the weekend.
Nice.
So, yeah, I would say that piece is one of the core ways in which I sort of decompress. And
because I mean, we kind of are involved in this tension between contemplating our existence and on the one hand, and on the other hand, just being and doing.
Yes, indeed.
And being and doing is really good.
Sure.
I think it's like very positive to be and do.
Mm-hmm. And it can be hard to be as well, insofar as being implies this kind of form of presence, and not allowing yourself to get distracted by what's going on in the world or on social media. And
Right.
that kind of thing. So I think I, like lots of people, struggle with that in my own way, but I'm trying to sort of recapture my attention and direct it towards more functional things, increasing the overtime. But it's a work in progress. So
So Robert, if you have a few more minutes, we do have an activity that we could do. You
okay.
thought it would never come back, Carmen. We do. Do you have a few more minutes, Robert?
Yeah, sure. I can.
Because we do this thing sometimes at the end of our Pandas episode called dancing. It's dancing, but it's quiet because we can't play the music. We each play it separately and put ourselves on mute. But then people see us just doing this. If anyone ever watches, I don't know if they do. Would you like to dance with us?
Sure.
Carmen is ambivalent about the whole thing.
I am ambivalent about the whole thing. Well, didn't you have a song that you
Yeah, is
like
there
to
a favorite
dance to?
song you'd like to dance to?
Oh, me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have faded that out. That was beautiful. I love that song.
That is a great song.
Oh, good. Glad you like it.
Yeah, and the panda really
I-
liked it too.
I love that kind of groove, which
Yeah.
that's what I think that is.
Totally.
Now remember why I don't like to dance here. As soon as I stand up, I'm decapitated.
Right.
As my room is just not deep enough.
Uh-huh.
That's pretty much it. And
Right,
so,
right, yeah.
all right.
Your panda really did a good job, I thought.
Totally, I agree.
No, I thought I got a little better with it,
Yeah.
Well, Robert, that was a real pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Likewise, this has been really fun. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.